Happy Healthy Caregiver podcast.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to see you again.
Pleasure to see you. I know we connected at the Rosalind Carter Institute. I guess that was back in November. So it's been a minute, but and we're gonna get into, you know, what life is looking like for you now. I know we connected then, but we always like to kick the show off with a little bit of encouragement or words of wisdom from the Happy Healthy Caregiver jar, because I'm a big believer in mindset, and sometimes we fill our head with some of the stuff it can be beneficial. So let's see, Usha. It says, what are your thoughts on this? Always remember that your present situation is not your final destination. The best is yet to come.
So my advice would be, I know, I think that you're thrown into a situation for a reason to make you stronger. I'm a firm believer in that whatever challenges you see, don't take it as a negative, to make a positive out of it and continue to grow. So that way you're ready to take on more challenges, and then it makes you a stronger person. Your mindset, your mentality is like, if I tackle that, because for me, I caregiving, I got thrown into it working full time. And, there were a lot of times where I felt down and why is this happening to me? But I saw it as a positive thing, like, okay, this is making me a better person. I have more to offer to other people, and testing my ability, like my fears that I have to overcome them.
Yeah, it's people would be sometimes I would say I wouldn't trade it for the world, and people kind of look at me funny, and I'm like, no, it's changed. Caregiving has changed who I am in positive ways, and it's also, I mean, changed my career. It's, I've had these amazing connections with people, and it's good soul work. Like, you feel like you're making a difference in people's life, and that the experience of going through some of that really hard stuff, the hardest season of my life. I don't know if it's been the hardest season of your life, but it makes you a better person, and it makes you who you are, and you feel like you didn't go through this experience for naught, that you can pay it forward and make someone's life a little bit less difficult or easier.
Yeah, you go outside your comfort zone and you're like, okay, if I can go through this, then what's next?
What's next? I know. I love your smile, by the way. What,
Thank you.
what, what, tell us about your caregiving story, Usha. Like, I know you said you've been working full time, and then caregiving entered your life. Like, how did this happen?
It did not expect, I have not taken the path that I wanted to. Everything has been unexpected. Just, to fast forward before caregiving, my father passed away right when I graduated from college. So my goal, I wanted to become a diplomat, work for the US State Department. And after he passed away, I'm like, I can't leave my mom alone. And she did okay for a few years. And fast forward a few years, she started to display some mental health challenges. What I thought at that time, I thought because she lost my dad, I did not know anything about dementia or neurological diseases, despite my dad being a gastroenterologist. And, at this time, the internet was not as prevalent as it is now, a wealth of information. And so we lost a lot of years with my mom, thinking she's schizophrenic or mental health. And it created a lot of frustration for me because I put my career, what I wanted to do, on hold to work in Orlando to find jobs in government where I can still make a difference in people's lives, not on a global scale, but federal and local level.
Mm.
And unfortunately, there was a situation with my mom where I found her on the ground. She didn't remember anything that happened, and she was hospitalized. And that's where they suggested that my mom may have dementia. So we lost about maybe 8 to 10 years on that,
Oh.
thinking it was something else. And that's when overnight I had to become a caregiver. And it was a challenge for me because I do not have any family in this country. I've got a brother who was going through medical school, so he was busy, and everything fell on me, and I had to learn, find resources, what dementia is, what to expect expect, to deal with her cognitive state. And as she progressed, I was stressed, and I realized the way for me to deal with caregiver stress was to get involved in the caregiving and dementia community, to interact with other
Mm.
people and to advocate for my mom, because I realized that she didn't have the ability, she was losing the ability to speak on her behalf, and who's going to be her voice. So that's kind of how my caregiving journey began.
It's, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but it's like that you wanted to be a diplomat and you wanted to, like, communicate and fight for causes, and you got there maybe, using some of the same skills, like indirect path, like you went through the road less traveled maybe. But I
Correct.
do feel like you're using a lot of those skills. And is it common, Usha, for people to be misdiagnosed with mental illness, or instead of dementia? Like, is that a common thing that happens?
I'm not sure now because, back about 10, 12 years ago, like I said, there wasn't so much talk about cognitive decline, dementia, Alzheimer's. I think just in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, there's people are more aware of it and talking about it more. Maybe there, to a certain extent, I think there was a cultural taboo, talking about cognitive decline. But I think, I became involved with the Alzheimer's Association as a volunteer, their advocacy group. And my first trip to Washington, D.C. could have been 5 years ago. And, you were explaining what dementia, what Alzheimer's is to the legislative staff or the elected
Mm.
officials. And then just maybe 2, 3 years ago, it's to the point where the legislative team is like, I've got a grandmother, I've got a parent. So someone is affected
Mm.
by it, and the awareness is there.
That's good. Then we can get to the heart of the matter. Well, you're a first generation Indian American. So how has your South Asian culture influenced your caregiving role?
It to a certain extent, I would say, is challenging in this, because people do not know what dementia was, or is, especially a few years ago. Everyone associates it as a memory issue. Oh, will she remember me? There were, some people who were hesitant to talk to her or interact with her because they didn't know what to expect. So I think that, from that point of view, that motivated me more to be a bit vocal in the South Asian community, to let individuals know that this is not about them. This is about the individual, and education is important. I think also, maybe from a cultural perspective, my mom had a lot of hospitalizations, so there
Mm.
were some cultural challenges in the sense that my mom didn't feel comfortable around male nurses initially, and she wouldn't be open to going to the doctor. She's like, "Oh, I'm in good health. I'm in good health." So I think we also lost time with that by not scheduling, yearly annual exams. In our community, a lot of people are like, if they're walking and talking, then they think they're fine. So the importance of getting an annual exam is important. But I think that also with caregiving, a lot of the responsibilities fall on one sibling. I'm sure it's like that in all cultures, but either the male or the female, so takes full responsibility. But I think the main thing culturally, that's slowly we're trying to. I'm trying to. It's my pet passion is create awareness in the communities and let people know that it's okay if your loved one is diagnosed, and provide the appropriate resources necessary. And those who are caregivers, they don't need to internalize things or be ashamed of what they're going through. It's okay to talk and seek support.
Those, you're hitting all my buttons for sure. Is it in your culture, the South Asian culture, is it predominantly an expectation that the women take on the role of caregiving, and that it's part of just what you do?
I think I think times are changing, fortunately. I know some Indians, South Asians who are male caregivers, who are making sacrifices in their careers. So I think, a lot of it depends on the upbringing. A lot of it depends on
Mm.
the individual family. Obviously, a lot falls on the females, from the taking care, especially taking care of another female individual, it comes time to bathing and,
Mm.
cooking and those types of things. But I would say, fortunately, times are changing. And since I've been an advocate in this area, I've had quite a few South Asian male caregivers reach out to me asking for resources because they're trying to balance their careers and care for a loved one.
Yeah. Yeah, I know one of the big, Asian influences in the caregiving space is Richard Louis. Like we got to hear
Mhm.
him speak, and I've had the pleasure of having him on the podcast before. And I love that he's kind of changing what that face of caregiving looks like, and that such a high profile person that's had caregiving impact his life. Well, you have also worked full time while you were caring for your mom and trying to navigate all of these things that was COVID. I'm like, how was that even doable for you? Like, what if there's working caregivers out there listening? They're like, I'm trying to work and keep my head above water. What were some of the things, the systems that you put in place, the tips that you have that made it work for you?
Elizabeth, I think about that every day. I don't know how I did it. I honestly don't, because I was running two departments, managing, and a lot of this, the where I work in government was new to me. So adapting to that, the environment also to a certain extent was very challenging. I was working 7 days a week, being in, outreach and evenings and balancing my mom. So I really don't know how I did it. I think that's the reason this past year I've just had to take a mental break and reflect on things. But what I did was, rather than and I could not quit my job. That was not an option because I provided for my mom financially as well. I didn't have any financial support. So I basically have wiped out my savings to care for my mom. She was my priority. So I'm working to rebuild that. But, some mechanisms I put in place, I had to think positively. I did everything, for my mom. I fortunately live and worked close by. So what I did initially, and I kept through it until I got someone to help for a few hours a week, was I had cameras in my place. So that way I could see, okay, if my mom's in the bathroom for a long time, not coming out, what's happened. Also, I completely, at that time, we sold our house. So I lived in a secured building in downtown where there were security guards. So I had a great rapport with the building. If I saw on the camera my mom fell down, I would call security to check up on her to make sure she was okay. And if there was a situation, to call 911 until I got there. And
Wow.
I was constantly, looking at my camera in between meetings and stuff whenever I got a chance. Sometimes if I had to go home during lunch, I would do that. And I also I had some great help who came, who started out initially just a few times a week, but I found them. I was fortunate enough that when the home health came to take care of my mom, when she was discharged from the hospital, I would ask questions with the therapist and asked if anyone was looking for work on the side or if they knew anyone. And that's how I got connected with the help who helped me. So there was a sense of relief. And that's essentially how I survived working and caring for my mom. I think once COVID hit, that was a different story. My mom started to gradually decline. COVID, in a way, was a blessing in disguise because I spent more time with my mom. I was more aware of what was happening, especially when home health was there for therapy. But what I had to end up doing was I asked the doctor, her primary care physician, to write a prescription for a hospital bed. So that way, if I knew I was out of the house for 3, 4 hours, I would put her in the hospital bed. That way it risked minimize her falls or any or her wandering off and stuff. And I would also turn off the breakers on the stove. I would only I would keep the lights on. That way she wasn't tempted to cook and forget. So that was my daily routine. Before I left, turn off the breakers, turn them on for cooking. Initially, I got a lot of yelling, and she was upset with me, but that gradually changed.
Yeah, you knew you had to do what you were doing to keep her safe. So interesting, like you never think about the security guard in your building being a part of your care team.
Mhm.
And clearly when you're talking, I'm hearing like, oh, Usha's advocating, like she's advocating for herself and asking questions. And, you were seeking the ways and the problems and the solutions, and you're trying to make the best of a really tough situation. I can't imagine like 7 days a week being in your shoes and being the only person to financially and physically and
Mhm.
emotionally care for your mom. um you know, you had to been running on adrenaline. Like when I met you in November, I think you kind of knew that you were, your mom had since passed away, and I think you had finally like taken a big breath, and you had, like you said, you had to step back a little bit and just find yourself again. Like talk about that a little bit, like how that, I think that was maybe unexpected for you, that you're grieving obviously your mom and you're missing her, but I think that whole like exhaustion, I don't know, how would you describe it?
It was exhaustion. It was brain fog. I think also my mom passed. I wasn't expecting her to pass so suddenly, I think, in the back of my mind, or I wasn't ready. Like I said, fortunately, with my dad being a doctor, I'm familiar and comfortable communicating with physicians. And I think they were trying to tell me to be prepared, but I was not. I was selective listening, and I think I was also fearing that I've lost my dad and I'm about to lose my mom, that I'm going to be alone in this world, and that anxiety was building up as well. And when my father passed away, I was not home when it happened. He had a massive heart attack, so I had stepped out of the house. I came home, and it felt like he was on vacation. But with someone passing who had dementia, it was like a slow death sentence, for the caregiver and for the individual. So I just developed a lot of anxiety that I never had. And I realized I was starting to get depressed, because my life, I had to rediscover who I was. I went back to work, within 3 weeks, just to stay busy. And I realized that wasn't helping me, because when I was at home, in my place, I was always used to being go, 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 caring for my mom, and I didn't have that anymore. That I was just feeling lost, and I was letting everything just get out of control. My health was getting out of control. I started to put on a lot of weight, got to the point that I didn't feel comfortable in my clothes, that I didn't want to go out. And then, sometimes individuals will say the wrong thing and I would become emotional, that would trigger. And I just didn't know where to begin, because most of my life I gave up what I wanted to do. And my mom was the focus. And to suddenly have, time on your side, and wanting to try to do different things, I was not in the mind frame. I couldn't concentrate. I felt like, you were talked about my smile. A lot of people comment on that. I just didn't feel like smiling. I didn't want to be around anyone. It was a very difficult journey. And I did reach out for counseling. I reached out to, I actually hospice. I reached out to hospice for counseling. And then I reached out to my work, and asked them that I think I need support, to get through this. And I reached out to a family friend as well, who is a psychologist, because I was desperate. I didn't want to spiral out of control and be in a worse state than I was. And I think after the Rosalind Carter Institute, when I met you, I came home that week and I was wiped out. I went to work the next day and I said, I can't do this anymore. And I need to take a rest, and I'm not doing justice to myself. And what I did was, a month later, I had booked a trip to Paris. I actually lived in France for a year. I studied there when I was a junior, and I scheduled that for March. I went with my best friend just last month, and I said, you know what? I'm giving myself 3 months to get back on track health wise, make some changes, and go to a city that I'm familiar with where I don't have to be a tourist and relive the good times when I was in college, and try to enjoy life again. And that was the best thing that I did. I think the first 4 months of my life this year, I'm a different person. I feel like I'm starting to get back to be my old self. I'm focused on more eating, healthier, because when you're a caregiver, it's just a struggle, survival. I put myself last. If it was too late to eat dinner, I'm like, oh well, I'll just eat tomorrow breakfast or something. And you adopt unhealthy eating habits, Uber delivery becomes a little too convenient every day. And I'm starting to walk, getting back into biking, and I have that energy again to get back into advocacy. So it was a very tough journey, but it's something that I learned a lot about myself. And the
Yeah.
emotional toll, the emotional side of being an individual.
Yeah, I think it's important that you share this because it gives people a lot of hope. Not everybody, hopefully we catch people before they're burned out, but that's not always the case, right? Like that's very like you were in survival mode. You were trying to figure out like just how to get it all working, and something had to give. And what would you say to yourself? Like, I guess, Usha, like if you met somebody that was you, maybe the you version of yourself, like 3 or 4 years ago, like what would you tell this person?
You have to be gentle on yourself, because I know I'm really harsh on myself. You have to be kind to yourself. I used to go to spin class a lot, and that was my way, my outlet. And then it got to the point I wasn't able to, but then I started to realize, okay, if I can go for a walk or do something for 10 minutes, it's okay. I
Mm-hmm.
don't need to be so hardcore on myself where you need to do this way or for this amount of time. Whatever little time you have, be grateful for it. I think also from a caregiver perspective, I saw what my mom went through. She has a lot of balance, she had a lot of balance issues and cognitive, and I don't want to go through that. I want to take charge of my health. She's a reminder to me, to take charge of your health, and whatever you can control, and whatever is in, God's destiny is, out of your control. But if I can control, my weight, my lifestyle, I need to take charge of it to the best of my ability.
Yes, well, that rings true for me as well. I mean, I watched my mom like slowly decline, not cognitively, but mobility wise for
Mhm.
sure. And, the last 2 years of her life bedridden. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that I can move my body and I can do these things. And this looking at that and like, oh my gosh, you do have choices in the way that you can um invest in yourself so that your future self will hopefully thank you. And yeah, I don't have a lot of good examples in my life of my family tree of people who are living a long time and living healthy. So I'm
Mhm.
hoping to break that cycle, and it sounds like you've got a
Baby
similar
steps
goal.
help. Yeah, baby
Yes.
steps. Don't get, you can't go, you can't climb Mount Everest without any practice. It takes baby steps, and it same goes, for us, with our health and developing habits.
It's so true. It's so true. You're back into your advocacy work, and so in 2019 you were Orlando Magazine. So your home is Orlando's Women of the Year for your dementia and caregiving advocacy efforts. And in 2022, recipient of Orange County Distinguished Asian American Award. So people are definitely noticing what you're doing, which is good. Like I think to that point, like we're normalizing the conversation and getting some of that out there. And then you have done your own stuff where you hosted a global virtual summit. Let's talk dementia and caregiving, hashtag South Asian Speak. Like what were you hoping to accomplish with that? And I'm going to link to it in the show notes so people can go and see it.
Yeah, what I was hoping, what I accomplished was to open the conversation, to create the awareness. What I did was, and I did all this, believe it or not, the final 6 months of my mom's life. So I don't, like I said, I don't know how I think, she kept me going, to do this. She passed away in December, and I held this forum in February. So like literally within 6 weeks. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to bring individuals, initially of South Asian origin, whether they were caregivers. I had one individual who is living with dementia in England, one who specializes with dementia studies. With South Asians in England. I also had a physician and some researchers, so that way they can talk about it. And I just had an open dialogue with individuals from around the world who are South Asian, what their experiences are, whether they're living with it or they're caregivers, what are the challenges being a millennial caregiver, what are the expectations, working full time and being a caregiver, and just provide resources. Like this, it's okay to join a support group. These are what the early signs are. You need to have conversations with your doctor if you notice your loved one or yourself has cognitive health issues. So that's kind of how it started. And I was able to connect with a lot of people on a global scale. And I'm going to continue those dialogues on a smaller scale, maybe quarterly. I'm hoping to do later this year, if not next year, to talk about palliative care. What is hospice? Because I was thrown into the situation about hospice, and I was strong about it, but there are a lot of misconceptions about what hospice is. And that was the best decision I made for my mom, because I know she was comfortable. So I want to take on these challenges, these topics that we're scared to talk about, and realize we're eventually going to have to live, and empower individuals with conversations and resources, so that way when they have to make decisions, they know where they need to go to, or they have some kind of knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, you're a good test, right? It's like the things that you wish you would have known. Hospice was a lot of new stuff to us too. And recently had Barbara Carnes on talking about like everything you want to know about hospice and busting the myths on that. So I will link to that in the show notes. We're still learning so much every day. I love that that you are continuing forward with your work and feeling re-energized in it. You serve as the Alzheimer's Congressional Ambassador, advocating for state and federal legislative priorities. Tell us about this. Like, what are you hoping, if you could wave your magic wand and see some changes in these areas? Like, what are some of the things that you're hoping to change with the dialogue and the stories that you're sharing in the government setting?
Yes, that's when I love doing that as a congressional ambassador, because for me, when I worked in the U.S. Senate, in Florida, I was a staffer, so I was constantly hearing stories. So I know what the buzzwords are to get people's attentions. So now I'm in the role of their constituents, saying this is what I want. Speaking on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association. But I think, and like I mentioned earlier, I've noticed just in the last 2-3 years that awareness in Washington, D.C. is there. Lawmakers and their offices look forward to seeing the Alzheimer's Association. Purple is the color. So they either wear purple shirts, jackets, or ties to show their support. So the support is growing. But I think that, I think the two key things for me is to find a cure, because there is no cure for this disease. There are only medications to help minimize the symptoms. And in some cases, it doesn't work. With my mom, I know from personal experience that nothing worked at the end. So it was very challenging, as well as from the caregiving perspective. As a caregiver, I'm very passionate. I wish there were resources available for respite care. If I could find someone who could come just even an hour a day, that way I could, take a nap or go for a walk, focus on myself, would have helped tremendously. So those are, some of the issues as an advocate that I'm passionate about. I think also another one that they're talking about in Florida is physician education to the extent having those conversations about cognitive decline with your physician, and recognize the signs. One thing that I was thinking about, it would be great. How physicians, when we fill out our physicals, they ask, do you have a history of whether it's cancer or this or that, pre-existing conditions. I think it's important for us as caregivers to communicate with our physicians that we are caregivers. That way they know that if your blood work is off, there could be a potential reason to it being stress. They can provide the support and the resources as well as your primary care physician. I know what I did was I was very strategic. What I did with my mom, my mom's doctor, primary care, was also mine. So he knew exactly what was going on. So if he would, order blood work and things were off, I'm like, okay, let me try in 6 months. You know what I'm going through. I'm stressed because, it messes up things. But he understood what was going on from both ends.
I've never paid attention. Like, do they have even cognitive decline on your medical history forms? I've never
I
noticed
haven't
that.
filled out the form recently, and I'm not aware of it, but hopefully, um, people
Yeah,
start talking about it, having the discussion, because, a lot of people, when they go to the doctor, they just answer what the doctors say. Oh, I'm feeling good. I'm having pain here. But I think that we have to take it a step further, especially as caregivers, and just, be really open what we're going through, because being a caregiver affects your health.
yes, it certainly does. I mean, there were so many things like, looking back physically, like, I mean, I had weight gain, I had acne. I remember being in a doctor's office one time and they were like, we got to go get the EKG machine. And I don't know that I
Hmm.
ever was like, oh, I'm a caregiver, I got a lot going on. I don't know that that conversation ever, but that would have been helpful, I think, to that situation. But that was one of my hot buttons in general, is like, nobody ever said, wow, this is probably a lot for you, and here's some resources and support that could help. I hope that's changing in our healthcare space. And well, you mentioned some good things. I mean, as far as the dementia awareness, and the respite is a huge hot button for me too. Like, I think people think like, that there's people helping you, but not everybody has that kind of a support team. And then the other thing that people mention is like the adult day services. Was that something that you ever tried for your mom, where like paying
It
a flat
wasn't.
rate?
I think again, there could have been there were cultural barriers. My mom would not leave the house. She had mobility challenges. I think it would have been more stressful for me to put her in a stranger environment than knowing she's at home in a safer environment where she's familiar with. So I know
Yeah,
for me that was not an option. Another thing, speaking of advocacy, I think is important that we've done in Florida is they have the Brain Bus, the Alzheimer's Association. So they go out in the minority communities and provide and have pamphlets, whether it's in Creole or Spanish, to those families. So that way they have that awareness as well. And I think that's important, since I know research has, I'm not sure what the stats are, but, research has shown that, the African American community and Hispanics, they have a prevalence of dementia. So that's another thing in Florida, that they've got the Brain Bus, and it's like a
brain.
minivan with resources, and meets with the various underserved communities as well.
I've never heard of the brain bus, but what a way to kind of bring the information to them, and meet them where they are. And yeah, and then back on the cultural differentiation on the respite stuff, like, I think this is where, like, people, that's why the story sharing and the advocacy that you do is so important, because I think people are easily to like write it off as like, oh, well, you have this will help you, and you're like, oh wait, no. Even the misconception, like, for me, my mom lived in an assisted living community. Well, just because she's in an assisted living community doesn't mean there's not a caregiving role. Like, there's
Hmm.
still a caregiving role. It's different. It's certainly different. It's not as, the mentally 24/7 draining as being a live-in caregiver caregiver, but there's still a lot of support and things that need to happen there. Especially, you know, my mom was never advocating for herself and working with this confines in the system. And frankly, they're older adults and they want things that the way that they want them.
Yeah,
And they want to live their life that way. And they will tell you as a caregiver exactly why it's not working. So I think, yeah, it's not a one size fits all approach.
exactly.
Yeah, with the respite thing, I know one of the things organizations I'm working with is Brutally Beautiful with Heather Zocali, and trying to get, you know, companies and organizations to offer respite, real respite for family caregivers, where they get a complete break from the day-to-day of what they're doing. And then the beautiful thing about some of these respite events that we have is we see these caregivers come in really weary, all different walks, you know, veterans and cultures and, you know, youth caregivers and caring for older adults or spinal cord injury, blah, blah, blah. And they leave with a support team. And I think that's the thing, the rope team, the lifeline, when you leave, that you don't feel like you're stranded out there alone and you have people to talk to. Like, that's also some of the advantages of the things that we can do it there. So I'm going to link to the Brain Bus. I'm going to link to the Brutally Beautiful. And, you know, what are some ways, like even the, you know, the exhausted caregiver, like, are there things that we could be doing to, I think, and I've heard somebody say this to me, it's like, they're mad that they are, you know, being stretched in their day-to-day life as far as like figuring out how to work and figuring out care. And, oh, by the way, I got to change the system too. Like, you're asking one more thing of me to advocate and change. Like, I hear them. I'm like, that is annoying. It is annoying that that's also on our plate.
It
So
is. And like I said earlier, is that, you know, it's like, why does this have to happen to me? You don't have the support, you know, you're strained mentally, physically, and financially. But like I said, at the end, it is rewarding. I know a lot of people say that, you know, and some may not realize it, some do. But like I said, I know for me, it's made me a much stronger person, that if I can balance working full time, caring for my mom, you know, paying for her expenses and still surviving, you know, still have food on the table for myself, and, you know, not in the hospital, which I was once or twice when she was, you know, alive early on. That's just fulfilling for me. And it just makes me want to go over the extra mile for other people, because, you know, when I worked in federal government for about 7 years, I worked on transportation, a lot of hot topics, justice, immigration, social security, you know, even student loans, you know, dealing with constituents from Florida. And a lot of them just don't know. You have to take the time to explain things, and either they appreciate it or they won't appreciate maybe at the moment, but they will later on. And that's how I kind of see the, you know, advocacy. It's important to use your voice, because you don't know what someone is going through, or they may be silent and internalizing it, and your voice may be, you know, their voice as well.
yeah, I'm reading a book or listening to it right now. In fact, I'll talk about it as in this episode. Is what I'm currently reading is a segment I've been sharing in the beginning. And I'm reading Dinners with Ruth, which is about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her
Mhm.
friend Nina Trottenberg, or NPR reporter. But, you know, I'm sure they had their own issues of the things that they were dealing with, where they were, you know, working in a very male dominated world and not even trying to raise the glass ceiling, but just like get in through the door. So I guess there's always these things, right, that we have to like fight for and continue to kind of push and say,
Mhm.
hey, you know, we're not just 53 million, you know, in the US and growing, but like we are Usha and Elizabeth and Heather and, you know, all of these different people. So, you know, I love that you've got faith in the system. You know, sometimes I think I recently though, and I'll link to this too, is like President Biden, a an executive order that
Mhm.
has some things in it for caregiving. And I mean, I want to go in and kind of get to the heart of it. But I think it's a step in the right direction, right? Like, it's at least the conversation is happening. Things may move a little bit slower than we all hope. But we got to kind of get and it's a human issue. It's not a party issue.
Yeah, as they say, Rome wasn't built overnight. So, we have to start somewhere, baby steps, have these conversations, use our voices. And, with time, we'll see, like I said, as an advocate going to DC every year, the mind frame, people are open. They're like, how can I help? How can we get with the part of this sponsor this legislation? I want to do a town hall with, the constituents to talk about Alzheimer's. I know the Alzheimer's Association does that as well with elected officials. They even show up at our walks. So it is really
Good.
a nice showcase of, support, that it's not just in Washington, D.C., it's also, boots on the ground, and it's consistent.
That's good. That's good. You, you know, let's switch gears and talk a little bit about self-care. Obviously, like the burnout has been real for you, and you have like figured out how to claw your way back through therapy and, revisiting the Paris and places that had brought you joy. And you talked about, you shared a caregiving tip too about taking videos of your mom. Why is that something that you think maybe caregivers should consider doing?
So what would happen was my mom was having frequent hospitalizations, either UTIs or, falls. She would go to the emergency room, and initially, um, physicians would dismiss it. They would not. They would think that she was. They kept saying, "Oh, she's depressed because your father passed away," and I was getting frustrated. I'm like, I live with her 24/7. I know what's happening, and sometimes they even alluded to the fact that, "Oh, you're a caregiver, you probably want to go on vacation and leave her in the hospital." So, because caregiver, apparently that is, at least I know in Florida, I've heard that does happen, is that people may not be caregivers, but they'll leave their loved ones in a hospital and take off, and then the hospitals can't get in touch with them.
Mm,
So, what I did was I was getting very frustrated during my emergency room encounters. I started to film my mom with her cognitive changes and her behaviors. And that way, whenever the ER physician would come, or even her primary care physician, I would say, nope, this is what happened. This is her walking. She's taking a few steps and she suddenly freezes, or she's in bed and she's kicking. She's sweating so much like she's walking a marathon. And then they started to take me seriously, and they would not have these side conversations thinking it was something else. They would get to the root of the cause and, do what was necessary. So, essentially, as I suggested to you, is that I would suggest that on your phone, just take short videos when there are cognitive or mobility challenges with your loved ones, and definitely share that. If you can participate in the doctor's visits, I would encourage, to do that and show them that these are the change. This is what her normal base rate is, and this is the decline. Because as the physicians would say, okay, well, this is her baseline, or this is her new baseline, meaning,
yeah.
with the decline. So, all this stuff was new, and it gave them a better picture of what was happening, and they appreciated that coming from a caregiver, because they spent more time trying to understand, as well as be compassionate.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I'm thinking like, I wish we had a baseline, right? The family caregivers, like, oh, this was my baseline before caregiving, and now I'm like way over here. So you
Yeah.
can see this disconnect of like old Elizabeth and caregiving Elizabeth and Usha. So maybe we take videos of us too, so we don't get.
Exactly. Or keep a journal. I mean, I typed everything out and I would send it, I would bring it with me to the hospital visits, or send it over before. I would send it to, the office staff, and that way they had time to review. But I
Mhm.
think, when they see that you take these types of notes and, you go the extra mile, it really, they have your, attention.
Yes, yes. Well, let's get some thoughts from me on so this is my journal. Journaling was very helpful for me to help process caregiving, and I wanted people to get a taste of that. So I wrote this journal that's got prompts to kind of get people to kind of explore who they are again, and prioritize self-care and health and happiness. So let's hear some thoughts from you, Usha. Um, what's a happy memory that you have related to your to your childhood, and why do you think it sticks out for you?
I think the happy memories are when, we traveled as a family because my father was a physician. It was very difficult for him to get time off. So that was very rare for my brother and my parents for us to travel. And also when my mom would entertain, my mom was a big foodie. Seafood was her specialty. She would have, plates overflowing from the table, and those are just happy memories that I took for granted, because now that I cook, I'm not nearly as good as her, but I took those for granted. But at the same time, when I look back, those are really happy memories, because my parents brought people together, and it was time well spent, whether it was as a family or with our family friends.
Yeah. Yes. So I know, being both my parents are deceased, both, your parents are deceased. The difficult days still happen, where we miss them. Um, and we think about them, but what helps you deal with some of those challenges that life or grief is bringing? Like, how do you cope with those now?
I put on my earbuds and go for a walk or go for biking. That really helps me out in the fresh air. Before, as a caregiver, I had like a gym membership, so I was indoors. But now I'm spending more time outdoors, biking and walking, and that is what really helps me. I love food, but I don't use food as a coping mechanisms. For me, it's doing something physical and challenging myself. And I think I may start off a little down, and then by the end of the bike ride or walk, you're in a different frame of mind.
I agree. Like, I feel like you don't do those and then regret doing them. It's not like you're like,
Exactly, and it
oh,
helps you. It helps you. It's
yeah,
your
I
way.
feel worse. Like, I never have said that ever,
Yeah.
after a walk or, and I also like to do a spin bike. Are you a reader, Usha?
I do. I read a lot of current events, global affairs. As a caregiver, I browse through some books and stuff. But again, time, I never had time. But I just got a Kindle last week, so that's one thing that I'm planning to do is, and I downloaded Richard Louis' book. On caregiving, I forgot the
Yeah.
title,
The
but
selflessness of, yes.
yeah, so I started to read the first few pages, and I was able to relate, but it's kind of, then I'm like, okay, I need to put it down because then it becomes emotional and sentimental. But I think that's he's a great individual, great speaker, very captivating, and I'm sure his book is it reflects him.
Yes, it can be healing to kind of hear some of that. Um, okay, last question. If you were to lose all your possessions, what item would you miss the most?
I think my photos, because I think the photos again are happy memories and they're irreplaceable.
Yeah. Yes. And we have those, right? They can kind of spark a lot of things, almost like the five senses. It just like you can taste it, you can hear it, you can smell it, you can hear their laughter and all of that. So
And even,
I
like nowadays, with our camera, it's not the same as the physical print of the photos. Because, when you go through the camera, you've got a lot of photos, and then sometimes you give up what you were looking for, and, having to organize it. But, having those print photos to go through, and it really circulates different kinds of memories, for me
yeah.
at least.
It does. I love it. I used to be a creative memories consultant and have people preserve their memories. And now I probably need somebody that was the old version of me. But I do love to surround myself with photos, and especially the trip ones, the travel ones.
Yeah.
I think those stick out for me too. Well, we are looking forward to seeing what you do next, Usha, with your experience and your passion for advocacy, and your passion for being a change agent in your culture, and to normalize the conversations around dementia and Alzheimer's. How do people stay connected with you and in touch with you?
I have an Instagram account called the Indian Caregiver. So I've been a little sporadic with posting, but I'm hoping to get back into that. I've also will be restarting my podcast, The Indian Caregiver, having a lot of guests talk about, self-care, grief journey, hospice, palliative care, things caregivers can do. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Usha Tewari, as well as Twitter. My Twitter handle is Ushwari, USHWARI. And that's where I post a lot of my advocacy stuff, tagging elected officials or thanking them, especially what's going on in Florida. So those
Mm,
are the best ways to get in touch.
good stuff. Well, good stuff. I'll make sure we're following all that, and we'll put all that in the show notes. Any closing comments for caregivers? Any last parting words?
If you like, I know from my experience, if you go for for a burnout, just seek the resources. Don't be shy to ask for help, whether you're a caregiver or a post caregiving journey. It's important to be surrounded by people, and also I would encourage you to find something that you're passionate about, and use that voice, whether you do it for yourself or for your loved one, because yes, our political system is frustrating. It does take time, but that's how we're going to make progress. And the more voices that there are, it does make a difference.
Yeah, we're louder and stronger together for sure. Thank you
Mhm.
for your time today, Usha. Thank you for sharing your story and your expertise. And I'm just delighted to know you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I look forward to connecting with you again soon, hopefully in person.
Awesome. Take
Take
care.
care.